Okay, so today, usually I don't title the shir ahead of time, but today the title is, hold on, I have to look it up. What I call it, Tying Up Loose Ends, Women Learning Seneca and Philosophy, Shul versus Beis Midrash. Okay, so there are three things that I want to talk about that all relate to sugyas we were doing recently, but they're not related to each other. First one is we did the topic of teaching women Torah Shabbat Peh and like women learning, learning Torah Shabbat Peh and Gemara on their own. And we did it based on the Rambam, and we did like Mefarshim in like Rav Makbili and Kafech. And I felt like I didn't quite do it justice in terms of like practically speaking, how does this translate to what we do now? Okay. So separately, this morning I was chatting about another student's question, former Shahavat student. I was chatting with Hindi Fader. So for those who don't know who Hindi Fader is, of all the chachamot in our community, she, in my experience, is the most knowledgeable about halacha. Okay, she is a yoetzat halacha, right? A female halachic advisor, whatever you want to call that. And she used to teach the halacha curriculum in Shalhevet. So if you ever have any questions about women and halacha, she's the person to ask. So she sent me a packet. One of the questions I asked her about was this topic. A student was wondering about women learning Gemara. So she sent me her packet, and in the packet was an English translation of a tshuva from Rav Henkin. So Rav Henkin was one of the most, one of the recent, or wait, I don't know which Rav Henkin this is. There's Rav Henkin who's passed away, and then there's a Rav Henkin who's still alive. I'm not sure which is which. That's embarrassing. But he wrote about this issue, and he explains the Rambam. And I wanted to read his explanation of the Rambam because we mentioned it as a possibility. And this is the first time I've seen a contemporary posek actually like bring this into psak. And I felt like I did not tie up that loose end, and I wanted to do that. So let's start off with this. Let's review the Rambam here. So this is in Perek Aleph, halacha Yud Gimel. Okay, and we're not going to redo everything. I'm just going to draw your attention to certain things. Isha shalamta Torah yesh la sachar. A woman who learned Torah has reward, but it's not like the reward of a man, because she was not commanded. Any person who does something that they are not commanded in, their reward is not like the reward of someone who is commanded, but it's less. We explain that to mean that it's not the reward of the mitzvah, it's the reward of compelling yourself to obey something that is being commanded of you. So she gets the same reward for the actual learning. She doesn't get the same reward for following the mitzvah because she's not obligated and she can leave it whenever she wants. All right, that was what we said then. Okay, then the alpha pishi la sachar tzivu chachamim shlo yilamed as adam as bito Torah. Even though she has reward, the chachamim commanded that a person not teach his daughter Torah, because the majority of women's minds or psyches are not oriented to be taught. And they will take words of Torah and make them into hyperbolic things or into like exaggerated or out of, like beyond the boundaries things due to their poverty of mind. Now, we explained that part of the reason for the Rambam statement there is, factually speaking, in his day, this was true. Women did not learn. Women spent all their time doing like household chores and stuff. Were not involved in any intellectual endeavors. So not based on nature, but based on nurture, okay, then this was the case. And we said that the Rambam himself holds that this is not based on nature, because he says in Hilchos Torah that anyone can master Gemara, men or women. And so he clearly does not hold that women are intrinsically inferior, but circumstantially he held that they were not oriented to learn. But we noted it's weird that it says Sivu Chachamim Shlo Yilamed Adam as Bito Torah. The Chachamim commanded that a man should not teach his daughter Torah. Okay, and we said why daughter specifically, and you and I had a bit of a disagreement about like how much we could read into that. And then what's the lashon Sivu Chachamim? They commanded. Like, does not sound like this is an Isser D'Oraisa or anything like that. And what would the Isser be? Right, so put that question aside. Then we had the last halacha, Amru Chachamim Kol Hamalamed as Bito Torah, again, daughter. The Chachamim said anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, Ki'ilu Limdat Tiflus, is as if he taught her frivolity or silliness. Okay, there's different meanings of what Tiflus is, superficiality. Okay, Bameh, I'm just remembering, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this in the shir, but one of my students last year in Lomdeha from Shalhevet, think for her Purim costume, just put a label that said Tiflut on her forehead. And I said, "What are you?" And she said, "I'm a girl who learns Gemara." I thought that was very funny, very creative costume. There's low effort costumes, and then there's low effort, really high quality costumes. But made of our memorim, but torshval peh. This is only for torshval peh. About torsh b'chsav lo yilamed osa l'chatchila v'im limda eno k'melamda tiflus. So only by torshval peh should we say that you don't teach your daughter Torah, and if you do, then it's like you're teaching her superficiality. But torsh b'chsav, you shouldn't teach her l'chatchila, ideally. But if he taught her, then it's not like he's teaching her superficiality. Okay. So our question here again: why focus on the daughter? Why you have this l'chatchila b'diavad? What about Talmud, right? That was another question. And what about halacha, practical halacha? Because the Rambam uses torshval peh as both the stuff that Moshe received at Sinai, but also Mishnah Torah. And we said that like he presumably holds women have to learn halacha. So how is supposed to learn halacha if you don't teach her, And then what about Talmud? He doesn't mention that at all. So like, is it like what Rav Kafach said that certainly they could learn Talmud? We thought that was a little weird, And then what about stuff like Rashi and like bringing down drashos that are on Chumash, but they're on, they're what do you call it? They're like bringing down torshval peh. Okay. So these were the questions that we talked about last time, and we had answers then. But what we're going to read now is Rav Henkin. I'm going to look at this. This is Rav Yehuda Henkin. Okay, I'm gonna look and make sure that this is which one this is. Yehuda Henkin. So this is. Wait for it. This is the. Oh my. I was going to say this is the one who's still alive, but apparently he died in 2020 December. So when they were going through the sugya last in Lomdeha, then he was still alive. Okay, I didn't realize he had died. So he's the son of hold on. Yeah, no. There's a bunch of Rav Henkins. Okay, and they're all chachamim. All right. So this is what he wrote. Okay, so he starts off. So this is in excerpted from Sheilot uTeshuvot B'nei Banim, volume 3, number 12, dated 14 Marcheshvan 5752. Okay. So he leads into this with I think he's addressing women education in general. I don't want to just read the Rambam. I want to like show the context. Underlying the controversy about teaching women Torah or women learning Torah is Psalms 119, 126. Eis lasos l'Hashem, it is time to act for Hashem, and then He Fe Resh Vav Torah Sacha. The Mishnah in Brachos 54a reads HFRU in two ways. If read in the past tense, heferu, they have violated. Okay, that's I think the plain pshat. I think the verse means it is a time to act for the sake of Hashem and punish those who have violated His Torah. If read as a command, however, haferu, violate, it means that there is a time to violate His Torah in order to save it, as it were, and introduce needed changes. The Talmud employs this second sense in a number of instances. In Brachos 54a to permit using Hashem's name in everyday greetings. That was a thing that they did. Greeting people with the name of Hashem. I don't know what the circumstances are, even though that might seem to be irreverent. In Yuma 69a, to permit wearing priestly garments outside of the temple. I have no idea what that's talking about, in order to save the community. In Gittin 68, to permit writing selections from the prophets, even though normally only complete books of the Bible may be written. And in Truma 14a, to permit transcription of the oral law. That's the most famous one, right? Is that it was usher to write down torshval peh, but they said, Eis lasos l'Hashem haferu Torah sacha. We have to violate Torah to save Torah.
Also, one of the Nevi'im made like a bama.
Right. That's actually it's a similar thing, but it's different because Nevi'im have the authority through Nevuah to temporarily suspend halacha. That's not Eis lasos, but it's similar in the sense of like it could be used for similar purposes, but it's a different mechanism.
Violate Torah to save it.
Right. Okay. This has no direct application to our time, however, as the sages of the Talmud had the authority to legislate changes while we do not. No rabbi or group of rabbis. Yeah. Okay, but he's going to say nevertheless in the next paragraph. Okay. Okay. No rabbi or group of rabbis today, however well-meaning, is authorized to introduce permanent changes in halacha. Okay. Let's read. Nevertheless, the second sense of Eis lasos l'Hashem teaches us to make every effort to find a basis within halacha for steps needed to preserve Torah observance. For that reason, 70 years ago, a number of Gedolim permitted the novelty of teaching girls Tanakh, ethics, and laws, although not Talmud, in cases in an organized fashion. This is the Beis Yaakov movement, I believe. even though girls' Jewish education had traditionally been within the home. Okay. Often there's no unanimity on such steps, for what is necessary in one community may be superfluous or even harmful in another. On a given issue, one community will expound Eis Lasos L'Shem Haferu Torah Sacha in order to introduce changes, while on the same question, another community will expound Haferu Torah Sacha. Wait, was that a question? Oh, will.
I mean, they're reading it in a different way.
Oh, yeah, right. Eis Lasos Shem to block innovation. I don't know what this question mark is doing there, though.
I mean, he's saying you could read the psak in two ways. So one community will read it, Eid Latzot Hashem, Hifir Torah Techa. The other community will read it, Hifir Torah Techa, Eid Latzot Hashem.
Oh, yeah, thank you. We'll expand Hifir Torah Techa, Eis Lasos Hashem to block innovation. Thank you. Okay, there you go. All right. First, all right. Now, so that's the overarching thing, and people have made this argument for teaching girls Talmud, which is and he's saying we don't have the ability to. The Rav made that argument, correct? Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So right. So that's the background, and again, you can see there's an ellipses here. So I don't know what's in the original essay. This is in Hindi Fader's packet. Yeah.
Also, the thing was like with some different communities that you can say it's the exact same thing for the conservative tribe of yeshiva.
That was what they tried to use, right? They tried to use questions like that, right? So the question is like, what do you how far do you take this, right? You could undo all of halacha by this.
You said, no, wait, but I guess maybe would have actually worked, then maybe we would say differently. That was a good thing, but just actually.
Right. Here's the thing, though, by the way, is have you ever read the conservative driving tshuva? So I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read excerpts, and the arguments they use are insane. Okay, they are not halachic arguments. Okay, for example, one of their arguments, I remember, and this is not representative of the whole thing, one of their arguments is, makes me laugh to say it, to even think it. Okay, there's a principle of ein shvus b'mikdash. Okay, that there's no rabbinic enactments of shvus. It's a category of rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos in the Beis Ha'Kneses. Okay, so they said for a temple, they call their shuls temples, that they can extend that principle to permit certain Shabbos violations for getting to temple. It's like, and in fact, Rebbe has an essay. Rebbe has an essay on halacha and comparing, like, I think a conservative. I don't think he calls it conservative, but like it's conservative halacha to like Orthodox halacha, and he explains like how like the difference between halachic reasoning and like Korachi type reasoning, So anyway, often but it's a legitimate question. How far do you extend this? Okay, but we're not going to get into the whole issue of Hifir Torah Sacha. I only read it because that's how he's leading into this particular issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be wrong, but even that is not funny anyway.
Yeah.
And it seems like they had like in iron.
Right. It's a big question. Yep. It's a good question. Yeah. Yes.
There's also something like, well, I can see the same thing with I guess girls learning Talmud, like kids where you have some small group of people,
right?
Where the women and I guess both women and men are annoyed at the inequality, where
right.
I mean, like Bar Orthodox is like a small group of people, and I guess even
lots, right? Okay.
Egalitarians are even smaller.
Right. Okay. So definitely this is a big issue, right? And again, I want to try to keep our eye on the ball, which is we're reading this for one purpose, which is to see a contemporary posek how he reads the Rambam in light of practical what do you call psak? Okay. So he says like this: first, note that the prohibition is to teach her, but she is not forbidden to learn. And we noted this when we actually learned the halacha. There's no isser for women to learn. It's only to teach her certain subjects. Okay. Shelo yilamed es bito Torah. Similarly, one may not teach Torah to a slave, but he may learn himself, as is stated in the Jerusalem Talmud in Ksubos 2:10. Women may therefore teach each other and learn in chavurah among themselves without restriction. It also follows that a woman is permitted to listen to men learning among themselves. For instance, a man giving a shir to men need not stop if a woman is present. Proof comes from the Talmud Yerushalmi in Sukkah 2:1, where no one objected to Rabban Gamliel's slave Tavi from sitting underneath the table in the Sukkah in order to listen to the sages' discussions, although it was forbidden to teach a slave Torah. And I think I mentioned this last time. People bring the same argument from Rabbi Yehuda Henkin's maidservant that she was hanging around while he was giving shir, and if it was usher for a woman to learn Torah, then he would be over lo lifnei iver, right?
The Sota showing you.
The Gadjan Sota with the teaching the woman the Sota learning.
When it was like the woman coming to, or marriage here, and then her husband said no.
Oh, right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. People even bring that down to halacha, right? Okay. A further instance from the Rambam is that the prohibition is specifically against teaching one's own daughter. Okay, now hold on just a second. Okay, he's gonna come back to your side in a second, but okay, he began, a woman who learned Torah is rewarded, and continued, the sages commanded that a man not teach his daughter Torah. The sages said anyone who teaches his daughter Torah. Rambam did not write outright that it is forbidden to teach women. He both paraphrased and quoted the Mishnah. Since even in his paraphrase, he mentioned only a father teaching his daughter, it is clear that he was being specific. Otherwise, this is my argument, he would have written, the sages commanded not to teach a woman Torah. The sages said anyone who teaches his daughter Torah. Okay, meaning he would have codified it as a universal and then quoted the sages' statement with the daughter thing, because that's how they said it. Now he says, I'm hesitant to rely on the above alone, this is like you, or on the Rambam's distinction between teaching one's daughter and women in general, since Tosfos, Sefer Hasidim, and the Teshuvos of the Maharil do not distinguish between daughters and other women. However, the distinction between most women and exceptional women can be relied upon. This was an earlier thing that Hinti has in her source packet about. Yeah. Right. So there's a thing with, for example, Devorah HaShofetes, right? Devorah the judge. She clearly learned Torah, and so there's this category of exceptional women, and Hindi has a lot of sources about that. That's what he's referencing.
The Rambam also kind of had that when he used the words like most women.
Right. That's also true. Correct. Yeah. Good. Furthermore, Rambam wrote that, quote, the sages commanded that a man not teach his daughter Torah. And now this is a point that Kafach brought down, or the Rambam Bekius. Everywhere in Rambam's Mishnah Torah, the phrase "the sages commanded" Sivu Chachamim signifies proper and desirable behavior, but not unenforceable iser v'heter. All right, so that was the thing that they made. It's not actually usser. The same applies to teaching women. Now here's where he transitions into his argument for practicality. Now that the Talmud is in writing, tiflut no longer applies because women take the written word seriously. So he's learning the tiflut thing as a woman hears her father say, and actually I've seen this firsthand, a woman hears her father say something, and to her, it's not a serious, scholarly academic thing. It's like, oh yeah, my dad told me this, my dad told me that, and so she'll treat it lightly. That's how he's learning the tiflut thing. Okay, I don't know which Rishon he's quoting. Remember, we saw there were many opinions of what tiflut is. So he says, women now take the written word seriously. There are those who teach women excerpts from the Mishnah and Talmud orally and make a point of not using regular printed texts, and thus are doing the exact opposite of what is required. So I guess there are some people who try to I guess, work around this by only teaching the Balpeh. I don't know. And while Rambam did not explicate any of this, it certainly deserves to be used as a supporting argument to remove women's Talmud study today from the category of tiflut. The more that women today can be seen as different from women of the past generations, the more they could be taught the oral Torah. Again, I want to get a hold of the original essay to see what the ellipses is omitting. Today, women who are highly educated in secular subjects but are lacking in Torah contrast the shallowness of their Jewish knowledge with the depth and interest they find in other fields. This is similar to the Rav's argument also, where he said women are going to college now and they're seeing tremendous chachma in secular subjects, and they think that Torah is superficial because they're never exposed to any chachmas of Torah, and that's why the Rav said that women should learn in-depth Torah. Okay, so Rav Henkin continues, this is the opposite of the situation described by the Rambam. It is precisely the poverty of women's Torah education that leads them to imagine the Torah as being trivial. Eis Lasos Lashem today is to expand and deepen women's Torah studies on the condition that there are halachic grounds for doing so, as I have shown. To seek to prevent all women from learning Torah, as in previous generations, is an example of the piety of fools and causes souls to be lost, God forbid. But even without this consideration, to the extent that there are exceptions to the majority, it is permitted to teach women Talmud. And then we're not going to read this other stuff, just so you know, in case you want me to send it to you. Hindi has a thing from Rav Lichtenstein and from Rav Twersky, who was Rav Meir Twersky, who was the Rav's grandson. And there's more stuff, but that they don't quote the Rambam, so I don't want to bring it into here. So the just to highlight from what our learning we see here is, I think the most significant thing is the Tzivu Chachamim, which again I had not heard until I read that footnote. Which apparently, now there's two Talmidei Chachamim saying that every time the Rambam uses Tzivu Chachamim, it doesn't mean Iser v'Heter. So I think that's something that we could rely on. And then he is saying that the Rambam was specific about teaching his daughter Torah. He wouldn't rely on that alone, but with other stuff. And by the way, actually, hold on a second. I think Rav Lichtenstein does bring that down and gives a explanation of that. Hold on, even though he's not saying the Rambam specifically. Daughter. Or was it Rav Twersky? Hold on. Just one second. Daughter. Oh yeah, here we go. So he quotes, yeah. Oh, so check this out. This is another argument. The second distinction reflected in the Mishnah's phraseology of Tziva Chachamim Shlo Yilamed Es Bito Torah, who explains the example, is reflected in the Mishnah's phraseology, is highlighted by Rabbi Yehoshua Falk, author of Prisha. He's also the author of Pnei Yehoshua, which I feel like more people know the Pnei Yehoshua than the Prisha. I don't know. Oh yeah. It's on the Prisha's on the tour, right? Yeah, it's on the tour. Prisha and Drisha. I thought it's on the Bavli. Okay, whatever. Who explains that the example of a father teaching his daughter Torah is designed to illustrate that instruction in optional portions of Torah may not be imposed upon women. Okay, so that is very similar, and I'm not going to attempt to paraphrase what Rabbi Chait holds, because listen to his shir, and I haven't listened to it in a while, but he's of the opinion that the problem is institutionalizing certain types of teaching women certain types of Torah, not on a one-on-one basis. Yeah, so he's saying that basically who's the audience of that statement according to this? It's a father who says, I have to teach to force my daughter to learn Torah, and that's why it's saying that man should not teach her in that way. But if she wants to learn it, then he's allowed to teach her. Well, no, what it means, and I think Kafik said a similar thing, is that each father should assess his own daughter's interest and ability, not like feel like you have to teach your daughter Torah.
Where's that coming from? What's the argument based on?
The argument is based on what.
But how are you saying that on that means evaluate and not really affect why not?
So I haven't read the Prisha inside, and I couldn't access the footnote. As you can see, I still can't access the footnote. So I'll see if I can ask her where that is, or we'll look it up. But so this is me just basing off of this summary of the Prisha. Sounds like what he's saying is what? Sounds like he's, he says, study which is not self-initiated is especially vulnerable to inadvertent distortion and frivolous trivialization. However, when women desire to voluntarily fulfill mitzvah Talmud Torah, their initiatives are welcomed and greatly rewarded. Accordingly, we must provide opportunities and forums for sincerely inspired women to study Torah. So I'm going to give you an analogy, right? Like there is a thing now in public schools where you have curricula imposed upon students, regardless of their interests, right? That's what public school and private school curricula are.
That's just education.
Right, that's most education, right?
So he's not, it's the same example as the high school.
Well, look, I'm just reading this. He's saying he explains that the example of a father teaching his daughter Torah is designed to illustrate that instruction in optional portions of Torah may not be imposed upon women. So what I'm saying is, since all of Torah, where would women learn Torah from is from their fathers, right? So this statement of Torah is talking against people who say, like, I am duty bound to teach all of my children Torah. Why should my daughter be an exception? And in other words, it's not expressing an isser to engage in the activity of teaching. It's saying it's discouraging this idea of an enforced imposition. Yeah. Right. They're using it as an example. Correct. Right. Yeah. He's learning it that way. Right. Yeah. Okay. So that is wrapping up the that part for now. Okay. Again, obviously this is much bigger sugya, especially Hafir Torah Secha, but I just wanted to wrap this up just to show how Rav Henkin read the Rambam. Okay. Second loose end is a very short one, which is I'm planning to make an episode of the Stoic Jew podcast for Friday on this. But since not everyone listens to that, I want to read this because it's very in line with the Rambam. So there's the stuff we did in the Kesser Shel Torah about how you should be willing to suffer for your learning and like not sleep unnecessarily and like devote all your time to it. So Seneca has a little thing in letter number 53 where he's talking about how devoted you should be to learning philosophy. And I thought that this is just a really good poetic thing. If you just replace philosophy with Torah, listen to his description here, okay? So I revved a little bit into the context. He says, the first part of the letter describes him going on this boat, and he got so seasick and he couldn't get the captain to pull over, so he just jumped out into the water and swam to shore and was like recovering from seasickness. And he started like reflecting on philosophy, saying how with physical sickness, when you're sick, you can't deny it, but with spiritual sickness, the sicker you are, the less you realize it, you know? So he says, with afflictions of the spirit, the worse a person is, the less he feels it. You needn't feel surprised, my dearest Lucilius, that's his student who he's writing to. A person sleeping lightly perceives impressions in his dreams and sometimes even aware during sleep that he is asleep, whereas a heavy slumber blots out even dreams and plunges the mind too deep for consciousness of self. Why does no one admit of his failings? Because he's still deep in them. It's the person who is awakened who recounts his dream, and acknowledging one's failings is a sign of health. Now, here's where he gives his little motivational talk about philosophy. So again, every time he says philosophy, think Torah. So let us rouse ourselves so that we may be able to demonstrate our errors. Okay, actually, I'm going to just substitute with Torah, okay, just for the purposes of rhetoric. But only Torah will awake us. Only Torah will shake us out of that heavy sleep. Devote yourself entirely to her. Okay, we use the Torah, that's Mishle, right? Rashi says the Eishes Chayil is a mashal for Torah, right? So using the personification of a woman, right? Devote yourself entirely to her. You're worthy of her. She's worthy of you. You fall into each other's arms. Say a firm, plain no to every other occupation. There's no excuse for your pursuing Torah merely in moments when occasion allows. If you were sick, you would take a rest from attending to your personal affairs and drop your practice in the courts. And during a spell of improvement in your condition, you wouldn't look on any client as being so important that you'd undertake his case in court. No, you would devote your entire attention to recovering from your illness in the quickest possible time. Well, then, aren't you going to do the same in these circumstances? Away with every obstacle and leave yourself free to acquire a sound mind. No one ever attains this if he's busy with other things. Torah wields an authority of her own. She doesn't just accept time, she grants one it. She's not something one takes up in odd moments. She's an active, full-time mistress, ever present and demanding. When some state or other offered Alexander the Great, a part of its territory and half of all its property, he told them that he hadn't come to Asia with the intention of accepting whatever they cared to give him, but of letting them keep whatever they chose to leave them. Torah likewise tells all other occupations, it is not my intention to accept whatever time is left over from you. You shall have instead what I reject. Give your whole mind to her. Sit at her side and pay her constant court, and an enormous gap will widen between yourself and other men. You'll end up far in advance of all mankind and not far behind the gods themselves. Would you like to know what the actual difference between yourself and the gods will be? They will exist longer. And yet to me, what is an indisputable mark it is of a great artist to have captured everything in a tiny compass. A wise man has as much scope before him as a god with all eternity in front of him. There's one thing too, in which wise men actually surpass any god. A god has nature to thank for his immunity from fear, Sure, whatever. While the wise man can thank his own efforts for this. Look at that for an achievement, to have all the frailty of a human being and all the freedom from care of a god. Torah's power to blunt all the blows of circumstance is beyond belief. Never a missile lodges in her. She has strong, impenetrable defenses. Some blows she breaks the force of parrying them with the slack of her gown as if they were trivial. I love that imagery of like the woman with a gown just, and then her the gown causes the missile to like ding off. Others she flings off and hurls back at the center. So I thought that's just a good description of you need to be completely devoted to her. Not just tend to her when you have a spare moment here or there. There's a desperation that this is what I'm doing with all my free time, and that's the only way you're going to get mastery. So I don't know. Again, this is maybe just the way I learn. This is why I make the Stoic Jew podcast. Is some ideas in Torah gain new color when you see the parallels talked about from outside. Okay, so no new ideas there. That was just a good reinforcement. Okay. Now we have the thing we were doing yesterday with the Beis Ha'Kneses. Okay. So we were wondering, given this halacha here, this is not in the packet. Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you. Oh, what happened? Oh, yeah. Oh, I think I'm sharing the whole screen. That's why it doesn't. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. always tell me. I'm glad you did that. All right. So this is in Hilchos Tefillah, in Yud Aleph Beis. We're not going to go in depth again. I just want to read this halacha to refresh our memory. Kishibonin Beis Ha'Kneses ein bonin oso ela b'gafa shel ir. Oh, that's not the one I wanted to read. All right. Ve'ein poschin pischei Beis Ha'Kneses ela lemizrach. The openings of the Beis Ha'Kneses should only open to the east. Shneimar v'hachonim l'fnei Mishkan kedma. Ubonim bo heichal shemanichim bo sefer Torah. So you build the heichal, the sanctuary in which you keep the sefer Torah. Ubonin heichal ze baruach shemispalin kenegda b'os ha'ir. And you build the heichal in the direction that they daven in the city. In that city, so that people should face the heichal when they daven. So the heichal is that big thing there, that huge edifice.
But not where the Torah is kept.
Right. We keep our Torah in there, but yeah. So
No, it is.
it's where the Torah is kept permanently, not the Torah where the Torah is kept temporarily. Correct. Yeah, right. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So the question was raised yesterday in our shul. Our heichal is in the south, right? So the question is why? And in the old YBT, then the heichal was in the east. Okay, so I asked for Pesach, and he said, first of all, he made your point, which is that we are north. We're far north enough that really Yerushalayim is southeast. Okay, so he said, if you go around to the different shuls in Far Rockaway, you'll notice them all taking stances on this. Okay, so there's some that are faced east, there's some that are faced south. Like he said, and I think this is true, Rabbi Brown shul is faced south. Okay, because it's faced that way. Because Lynette's, I think Rabbi Brown shul is faced south. Shar Yashuv, he says, is faced diagonally. Okay. We'll get to this in a second. And Yeshiva Far Rockaway is faced east. Okay, so he said this is a question that comes up in all of the, all the shuls around here. And then he also mentioned the YU thing. He said there's a whole thing in YU. And then he said there's another concern. I don't know. It was funny. Everyone knows like references. Oh, there's a YU thing. But I don't know the details. I'll see if I could find it. But then Rav Pesach also mentioned that the door facing the street is opposite the heichal, right? And he didn't say these words, but I assume that it's because the entrance has to be on this side or something like that. And all I remember when we made this yeshiva, the new building, there were such crazy like zoning laws and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised. But then I found out the source of the psak. The psak for this shul was Rav David Feinstein. Okay, so we do have Rav Moshe's son Paskin that we should build it like this. So it's not just like politics or like aesthetics or convenience, that this is actually like a yeah. Okay, so just wanted to like get that out there, right? Even though I don't know all the details, but I was just relaying what Rav Pesach told me.
The heichal supposed to be opposite the entrance?
Yeah. But I don't know if it's because of the heichal or because of the direction of davening. I'm not sure which one it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's that issue. Then yeah.
You also heard in the recording.
Yeah.
Something about how the tzaddikim are supposed to face.
I forgot about that. I remember that after I already left yeshiva. So I'll have to try to remember to ask him. Okay. Then the last thing is back at our halacha, which is learning in the why chachamim should learn in the shul. Okay. So a friend of mine sent me a 1-minute voice note answer. He listened to the shiur, and I'm going to play his answer and ask you what you think. Okay. Without giving my opinion. Hold on. First, the question is, we said it was really weird that chachamim, well, davening in the Beis Midrash is not weird because the Beis Midrash has a higher level kedusha, and that's their Malkum Torah, and there is an idea of davening in your Malkum Torah, which the Rambam doesn't go into. The weird thing is why the Rambam encourages people to exert themselves in Talmud in the Beis Ha'Kneses, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's the question. Okay. So this is what he said.
So the functional distinction between Beis Ha'Kneses and the Beis Midrash. One, you have the architectural fact that a Beis Ha'Kneses has a specific structure and orientation. And two, you have the Beis Midrash being a defined location for learning and therefore possesses svarim. It's a library of sorts that we learn in. So I think what the Rambam is saying is not that you should learn in the Beis Ha'Kneses instead of the Beis Midrash, but rather everybody has access to a Beis Ha'Kneses. Not everybody has access to a Beis Midrash. And not everybody's going to have a library in their community that allows them to have multiple svarim, but everybody has a shul in which to daven. And the point that he's making is that even if you have svarim that you could learn at home in, and you would think that would be more tznius to learn your whatever precious few svarim you have at home before the invention of mass industrial printing, you should still instead be learning in the Beis Knesses as a makom of Torah and Tefillah.
What do you think?
Would there be a better way
Yeah.
for Rambam to say that then? Like if he meant that, how?
Yeah,
I feel like you could phrase.
that is a good
I
question.
don't know how.
Yeah, so let's just flesh this idea out just a little bit here, which is I did not think about the fact that it's funny, Rambam says every city has to build a schoolhouse for children, and every city has to build a Beis Knesses.
That's
Right.
cool.
I'm other stuff also. There's a place where the Rambam says it, and I actually have to look there.
Yeah, I've heard that you're supposed to build a mikvah before Shul.
Could be.
I don't know if that's Rambam. I just know
right.
I've heard that.
Could be,
somewhere,
but
somewhere.
I'm not aware, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have to build a base midrash, right? I don't think he says you have to build a base midrash, right? And it also stands to reason, and like you said, there's going to be Beis Knesses in every community, and again, we have a hard time like putting ourselves in the old old world back then, but like let's say like Volozhin was a yeshiva, right? Here you got a yeshiva on every block, right? I don't know. I mean, my understanding, and I'm not a student of history, is like people would send their kids out of town to the big yeshivas, and there were big yeshivas, but like it's not like you just had a base midrash every, and I realize I'm treating yeshiva and base midrash as synonymous, but I'm just saying like I think his line of reasoning is correct, that every place has a Beis Ha'Kneses. And then his diuk here about, or not his diuk, his reading that like, it's not saying instead of the base midrash. Certainly, if you have a base midrash, you should learn there. And if you're Talmid Chacham, you should learn there and you should daven there, and all of your stuff should be there because it's higher level Kedusha. But this is for people who are not there and who have a choice between learning elsewhere or the Beis Ha'Kneses. And they should learn the Beis Ha'Kneses because of the ideas that we said of Makom Tefillah, Makom Avodah Shebelev, all these other ideas. And for the ideas that we said that a Beis Knesses from the Rav, the idea of Beis Knesses is the hub of the community, and that by people learning in the Beis Ha'Knesses, it's going to foster the environment of like learning being a value in that community. I don't know why this comes to mind, but I'll say it anyway. I think it's relevant. So way back when, then our family used to go to like Pesach programs like once every other year, and there was this family, I don't know if they still do Pesach programs. We haven't done this in like 10 years, Smilo, and they had a program in California, they had a program in Florida, and we liked that program. And in the shul, they would import a full base midrash, like there would be shelves of like all the svarim that you would need, and there were yeshiva bachrim, like I guess that was the crowd that it catered to, and and there were people constantly learning. Okay, and then one year we went to this other Pesach program, again Orthodox from program. I couldn't find a chumash. I could not find a chumash. I think they had like sidurim. I actually had to have my mom, like I didn't pack a Tanakh or a Chumash because I figured they'd have it there because all I had known was the Smilo program, and there wasn't anything in sight. And it just, the culture of the place just felt so different that people would go to the shul for minyan, and then that was it, Whereas in this old program, there were people constantly learning. There'd be like yeshiva bachrim like asleep on the couches with like svarim on them, And I'm getting the picture that like that's the type of culture that Chazal advocated for in places without a vibrant base midrash. So you make the community place into a place where people are learning, as a cultural thing. Yeah. Okay, I think it's a good shot, and it resolves that question of mimanav shach, like what should chachamim do? Chachamim should learn in the base midrash if there is one, and if not, they should learn in the shul. I think that's a simple factual answer. Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly, and you could explain why you won't forget. What about you won't forget quickly? Say again.
You're more involved?
So I think you could give two categories of interpretation. One is a perfection based thing. The other is a like psychology thing, you know? So psychologically, you could say that the fact that you're expending more effort to like go there is going to make you relate to it differently. Like you're being kovea yourself. Yeah, in a makom tefillah or makom Talmud to learn. There's all, you could explain it even like, I think this has not been disputed. I mean, literally everything I learned when I was getting my psychology degree that talked about memory said that the more particulars you associate with the thing that you're studying, then the better your memory is. So let's say if you're studying for a test, if you could study in that one location where you're going to take the test, it'll be better. If you're chewing gum and then you chew gum on the test, you'll remember it. If you're wearing the same clothing, you know, so like presumably, you know, if you are making a point to go to your makom in the Beis Ha'Kneses to learn for all your learning, it's gonna be better than you learn here, you learn there, you learn, you know, like haphazardly, you know. And then if you want to say perfection stuff, you could say all the ideas that I was toying around with of like, you know, Talmud Torah is avodah shebelev, and you are underscoring the fact that not only when you learn are you like enriching yourself intellectually, but you are being engaged in avodah lamakom, in a makom avodah, you know. That was I did not mean to make that poetic thing, you know, but yeah.
Okay, so one, if this is the case, would there be no better way to write that?
Okay, so now let's see that. You give a Talmud a bit of Beis Ha'Kneses.
Like, I don't know how you could write that in a
Yeah.
concise way without making like a ton of disclaimers.
Yeah, right. It is. This is very concise. That's what this has going for us.
He's not saying that it's like a whole, you know, it's right.
Right. Oh, so now I accept your kal v'chomer. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I didn't accept the kal v'chomer is because I was not thinking clearly about as opposed to what, meaning the as opposed to learning at home or haphazardly. That just wasn't in my mind. Yeah.
I would say you should learn in a Beit Midrash, and if you don't have one, then go to the Beit
I
Midrash.
think because it's so obvious that you should learn. No, I think it's so obvious you should learn the Beis Midrash. That is what a Beis Midrash is, you know, and that answers the stupid question that we asked about, like, so it turns out the Chachamim are davening in the Beis Midrash and learning in the Shul, you know, like no, they're not. They're learning in the Beis Midrash because that's what literally it's called the study house, you know, like that's what they're doing, you know. So this must be talking about someone who's not who is either or it's like what Yosef was saying, which is that I don't know how these things were set up. You know, like you, what do you call it? Like, let's say like, you know, I'm just making this up, right? But let's say like shuls needed to be accessible for all three tefillos, right? So presumably you'd have shuls that are within walking distance for Mariv, okay, right? And it's dark in Mariv, and dark back then was bad, right? Dark back then, like it's dangerous to go at night, you know, all this other stuff. You know, you have halachas about like waiting for the last person in shul, but the Beis Midrash, you know, it's not a Beis Midrash in every corner, right? So like, it's possible that also Chachamim, you know, when they got home or whatever, and they're gonna be learning at night, as we'll see in the next halacha, they should learn in the shul, which is very close by, as opposed to like sleeping in the Beis Midrash or like risking their lives to like walk home at night, you know? Like there might be these cultural factors that played in that, you know, that are reasonable to assume. Yeah. So just to answer your question, is it's not a matter of could you have said it more concisely? It's a matter of there's already a latent assumption that the Beis Midrash is where you're doing the main part of your learning. So this is only talking about when you can't be in the Beis Midrash for whatever reason. And there are also certain assumptions about what role the Beis Ha'Kneses played back then and what the alternatives were.
Okay, so I would say, well, maybe not. Maybe there still could have been a havamina of like, oh, maybe I should learn at home because I don't know, that's where I'm most comfortable or something like that.
Right.
And so then the Rambam would come and tell you, no, you should learn in the Beit Midrash, and if you don't have one, learn in the Beit Knesset because it's better to be like
I
in
think
that
you
location.
understand that if you just have one of the
Yeah, I think so also. Yeah, I think this. Yeah.
Oh, it's better when it's just nothing. It's everyone at home, but it's better, like it's fine when at home, but it was only in the Midrash.
Right.
Obviously, it's better when it's nothing.
Right.
And it's better when it's the Midrash.
Yeah.
I'm not on
Yeah, right. I think so. Yeah, I think it just doesn't need to be said about the Beis Midrash. Just a side mushal. I think the point is clear, but I just want to say it anyway, about the assumptions of cultural norms that was kind of blinding us to the to reading the halacha correctly. It'd be like if you said today, like if someone said like, oh, I have a headache, okay, and you said why don't you just go to your local drugstore and buy some Tylenol, right? So for us, local drugstore is like hop in the car and like drive 5 minutes, But if you went in like medieval Europe, like you have to go seek out the local apothecary and like what do you mean go to your local drugstore? Like that's ridiculous, being aware of our own cultural like biases and societal norms is important when reading stuff that was about societal institutions. That's like the methodology. Yeah.
I mean, this might be out of place in the share, but today then what should you do? Because we do have way more baits in Midrash.
Right. So you should definitely go to the base Midrash.
To what degree? Right? Like let's
right.
Where my parents live is
right.
Hempstead, that's 30 minutes away. Should
right.
I drive here for
so that's a legitimate question. Right. Right. So that's a legitimate question of at a certain point, then do the costs outweigh the benefits, and I think the answer is the perk of learning in Shul, the way he describes it, is you won't forget quickly. But if the quality of your learning or even the quantity of your learning is going to be diminished, I think that's a fair question then, like if you could take 25 minutes to go and learn for 5 minutes in the Shul versus learn half an hour at home, I think it's a no-brainer. You learn half an hour at home, Right. I think it's a fair question. Right. Yeah, I think it really is a fair question, and I think that it's not something that you can like poskin on. Like, I think that it's a question that a person has to like weigh, I don't know how to say it. Yeah. 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 Right. And then if you want to ask from the other opposite perspective, right? If someone's living on the 3rd floor of the dorm and they say, well, in the time that it takes me to get downstairs, I could learn like one extra halacha, so I'm going to stay in my room. That's clearly ridiculous. Like that's like, so like there's a spectrum here, Okay, let's do this because we have 2 minutes. Let's just read the next halacha and then plan to work on it tomorrow. Okay. Next halacha now is really getting into the meat of what you were asking about, Chaim, of like, what should you do? He's been transitioning into that, right? But this is even though it is a mitzvah to learn by day and by night, a person only learns the majority of his wisdom at night, whatever that means. Therefore, if a person wants to merit the crown of Torah, he should be careful with all his nights. And he should not waste even one of them with sleep, and eating and drinking, and conversation. I think there's another manuscript that also says you shouldn't waste even one of your Friday mornings. We'll have to check later. Ella b'Talmud Torah of Divrei Chachma. That was a joke, but I'm serious. Ella b'Talmud, what? Yeah, that was aimed at the general listening populace, not any particular person. Ella b'Talmud Torah of Divrei Chachma. You should spend all your nights in Talmud Torah and Divrei Chachma. Interesting, by the way, he says Talmud Torah and Divrei Chachma. Not just learning, but like Rov Chachmaso. Even like your knowledge of other stuff. Amru Chachamim. The Chachamim say, okay, now I never got this. Okay, I think this is actually a manuscript difference. I think if you look in the regular Rambams, this is one where I would be inclined to read the regular Rambams, if not for the fact that this is authoritative. The regular one says, Ein Rina Shel Torah Ella Balayla, Shneimar Kumi Roni Balayla. Okay, so the Rina, but this is Ein Garna Shel Torah. What is Garna? So Gorin is a gathering. Okay, like Rav Makbili says, a sifasa, the kiyuma shel Torah, like a silo, So the silo of Torah is only accumulated at night, as it is stated. Kumi roni balayla. Literally, that means get up and cry at night or get up and sing at night. I don't know why my audio is on. Sorry about that. V'chola osik b'Torah balayla, and anyone who is involved in Torah at night. This is a weird phrase. Hut shel chesed nimshach ala bayam. A thread of kindness is extended to him during the day. Shneimar, as it says, Yomam yitzave ad Hashem chasto uvalayla shiro imi tefila lakel chayai. As it says, by day Hashem commands His chesed, and at night His song is with me. Prayer to the God of my life. Any house that doesn't have words of Torah heard in it at night, Eish Ochalta, will be consumed by fire.
Wait, house?
Oh, sorry. And now this is, that's why. Okay, because I had an alarm set, which I need to remember. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's tomorrow, but it's weird that it's his house because he just told us that we should go to Shul. Like I would.
That's a good
I would
point, right?
expect
Yeah.
Every single house to be quiet. because
Right,
those
that's
are the-
that's funny, right? But I do think the thing I said before though is relevant. The fact that it was considered very dangerous to leave your house at night, you
But
know.
you said that presumably the shuls would be close by.
Right, but
so-
there's a cutoff point, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot to figure out for tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. All righty. Have a good day.
I would not